The rust-eaten husk of what was once Denver sat like a skeleton in the basin of the Rockies, a testament to humanity's first attempt at self-annihilation. Kalen picked his way through the skeletal remains of a skyscraper, his rebreather hissing a steady, metallic rhythm against the silence. Dust, thick with the ghosts of strontium and cesium, coated every surface in a fine gray powder. He wasn't a soldier or a historian. He was a scavenger, a grave robber of the old world. And this particular tomb was rumored to hold treasures, not gold or jewels, but something far more valuable: intact pre-collapse server banks. He moved with a practiced economy of motion, his worn envirosuit patched with synth leather and scavenged plating. The suit's internal sensors chirped, flagging a spike in localized energy that didn't match any known radiation signature. It was clean. Too clean. A focused hum that cut through the background static of the dead city. Kalen's hand went to the magnetic clamp on his thigh, where a heavily modified rivet gun sat snug and waiting. He followed the signal down into the building's sublevels, deeper than he'd ever gone before, into the concrete guts where the city's old automated transit systems lay dormant. The air grew colder, the dust thinner, replaced by an unnerving sterility. He found the source in a cavernous terminal, nestled between the corroded hulks of maglev trains. It wasn't a server bank. It was a pod, sleek and black, forged from a metal that seemed to drink the light from his headlamp. It was utterly alien, shaped like a teardrop, and devoid of any seam or joint he could discern. It hummed with that strange, clean energy, a quiet thrum that vibrated up through the soles of his boots. Protruding from its side was a crystalline rod, pulsing with a soft, internal luminescence. He had seen enough pre-collapse sci-fi to know this was bad, the kind of bad that didn't just get you killed, but got your entire species noticed. For the past century, since the atmospheric fires had finally died down, humanity had been quiet. Deliberately so. The new nation-states, cobbled together from the ashes, understood one cardinal rule: don't shout into the jungle. We were the primitives who had almost burned our own village down, and we knew better than to draw the attention of whatever predators lurked in the cosmic dark. This pod was a predator sniffing at our door. Kalen circled it, his rivet gun now in his hand, its weight a familiar comfort. He was no fool. He wasn't touching it. His job was to find tech, sell it to the highest bidder in the orbital stations, and live to do it again. This was above his pay grade, above anyone's. He backed away slowly, his mind already calculating the fastest route to the surface, when a flicker of movement caught his eye. A section of the pod's surface rippled, turning translucent. Inside, suspended in a pale gel, was a creature. It was slender, insectoid, with limbs that bent at impossible angles and a head composed of shifting crystalline facets. It was observing him, not with eyes, but with a palpable sense of focused analysis that made the hair on his arm stand up. Then, the crystalline rod on the outside began to glow brighter, the hum intensifying. Kalen's suit, AI, a cobbled-together personality matrix he called Silas, spoke in his ear, its voice a calm, digitized monotone. Warning: high-energy transmission originating from the artifact. Non-terrestrial frequency. It is broadcasting. Shouting into the jungle. Kalen didn't think. He acted. The instincts that kept scavengers like him alive in the ruins were not born of bravery, but of a deep and abiding understanding of existential threats. He raised the rivet gun, a tool designed to punch hardened steel bolts through girders, and fired. The concussive blast was deafening in the enclosed space. The bolt, a foot-long spike of tungsten, screamed across the terminal and struck the crystalline rod. For a moment, nothing happened. The rod simply absorbed the impact. Then, a web of hairline fractures spread from the point of impact, and the clean hum turned into a discordant shriek. The light inside the rod flared, not outward, but inward, collapsing on itself with a sound like shattering glass. The broadcast stopped. The pod went dark. The creature inside convulsed once, its multifaceted head turning towards him with what felt like pure, unadulterated shock before the gel clouded over, turning a milky, opaque white. Kalen stood there, chest heaving, the smell of ozone sharp in his rebreather. He had just picked a fight he didn't know the rules to, with an opponent he couldn't comprehend. He had broken the first and only rule of survival. He ran. He didn't stop until the gray light of the poisoned sky broke through the shattered cityscape above. Back on the Spire, a ramshackle orbital station built around the tether of a failed space elevator. The news of Kalen's find spread not like wildfire, but like a virus. He'd sold the sensor logs and a few blurred images to a data broker named Anya, a woman whose face was a collection of augmented realities and whose allegiances were traded more often than her currency chips. He'd left out the part about shooting it. He wasn't stupid, but Anya was, if nothing else, thorough. She cross-referenced the energy signature with Deep Space Listening Post archives, files that were technically the property of the North American Coalition, the dominant and most paranoid of the new governments. Within a week, Kalen was no longer a scavenger. He was a person of interest, which was a polite way of saying he was a prisoner. The man who came for him was named Marcus Thorne, a relic from the Unification Wars, with a face like a roadmap of old battles and eyes that held no warmth. He wasn't a soldier anymore. He was a director in the Coalition's nascent Office of External Threats, a department most people thought was a joke, a budgetary black hole for a threat that didn't exist. Thorne didn't think it was a joke. He sat across from Kalen in a sterile interrogation room, the orbital lights of the Spire glinting off his chrome cybernetic arm. "You found a probe," Thorne stated, his voice a low gravel. "I found some salvage," Kalen countered, forcing a casualness he didn't feel. "Paid well." Thorne slid a data slate across the table. It showed a simulation, a 3D model of the alien pod, the crystal rod now repaired, a beam of energy shot from it, a tight band transmission aimed at a point somewhere beyond the orbit of Neptune. This is what it was doing when you found it. It was sending a locator beacon, a pin in a map, one that says sentient primitives, ripe for harvest, located here. Kalen's blood ran cold. The beacon failed. The logs show a catastrophic energy failure. Thorne leaned forward, his cybernetic hand clenching into a fist on the table. The sound was like stone grinding on stone. It didn't fail. "Kalen, you stopped it. My analysts reverse-engineered the impact data from the dust particles on your suit's outer layer. A tungsten rivet, traveling at Mach 3, caused a feedback loop that fried the transmitter's core. You didn't just stumble upon it. You shot it. You threw the first rock." Kalen was silent, denying it was pointless. "It was looking at me," he finally said, the memory of that cold, analytical presence sending a shiver down his spine. "It was cataloging me." Thorne almost smiled. It was a grim, unsettling sight. That's what I'm counting on. For 100 years, we've lived by one creed. Stay quiet. You just prove that when pushed, we get loud. I've spent 20 years trying to convince the Coalition Council that our policy of hiding under a rock is just a way to die slowly. They're afraid. They think any action is suicide. You, a junk hauler with a modified power tool, are the first human to engage in an act of interstellar war. And you won. I broke a light bulb. Kalen spat. You have no idea what's coming. Oh, I think I do, Thorn said, his eyes glinting with a dangerous fire. They sent a scout. Quiet, passive, designed for simple observation. They'll assume its failure was a malfunction, so they'll send another. This time, maybe one with a few defenses. They'll be cautious. They won't send an armada based on one failed probe. They'll escalate slowly, methodically. They'll test our responses, believing we don't have any. He stood up and walked to the room's single armored window, looking down at the scarred, brown and gray marble of Earth below. They think we're broken. They see the ruins, the radiation scars, the thinness of our atmosphere. They see a species that beat itself half to death. They don't see the truth. Thorn turned back to Kalen. We didn't just learn how to destroy. We learned how to survive. We learned how to rebuild weapons from scrap, how to jury-rig fusion reactors with spare parts, how to fight wars in tunnels and ruins and poisoned winds. Our greatest technologies aren't in our ships. They're in our instincts. We are a planet of survivors, hardened by a fire of our own making, and they are about to learn that cornering a wounded animal is a fatal mistake. 3 months later, a second probe entered the solar system. This one was different. It was larger, armed with a small kinetic cannon, and it didn't land. It took up a high orbit over the ruins of Europe, its sensors sweeping the globe. The Coalition Council panicked. They debated surrender, broadcasting apologies, offering tribute. Thorn, however, had been busy. He didn't use the Coalition's fleet of clumsy patrol craft. Instead, he had used Kalen's knowledge. Scavengers knew where the real treasures of the old world were buried. They knew about the mothballed military projects, the forgotten doomsday weapons, the things the Unification Accords were supposed to have dismantled. Thorn's people, guided by Kalen, had unearthed a relic, a pre-collapse orbital defense platform called Loki's Needle. It was a tungsten rod the size of a city bus, designed to be dropped from orbit, a kinetic weapon of unimaginable power. It hadn't been used in over a century. Its systems decayed, its power core almost dead. Thorn's engineers, a collection of outcasts and mad geniuses from the fringe territories, had spent weeks coaxing it back to life with scavenged parts and sheer, bloody-minded desperation. From a hidden command bunker deep in the Siberian wastes, Thorn gave the order. He didn't hail the probe. He didn't issue a warning. He didn't even target the probe itself. He aimed Loki's needle at the moon. The rod fell in absolute silence, a ghost of a forgotten war, accelerating through the vacuum. It struck the Sea of Tranquility, not with a flash, but with the force of 1,000 nuclear bombs. The impact was visible from Earth as a brilliant, blinding starburst, a plume of lunar rock and dust, superheated into plasma, erupted into space, a cloud of incandescent shrapnel traveling at thousands of kilometers per second. The alien probe, programmed for caution and analysis, had no protocol for an enemy that would deliberately wound itself to create a weapon. Its kinetic cannon fired, uselessly trying to intercept the cloud. It was like trying to stop a tidal wave with a handgun. The shrapnel swarm hit it from 1,000 directions at once, shredding its hull, vaporizing its systems, and reducing it to a cloud of incandescent atoms. On board the flagship of the Vex Imperium, stationed invisibly in the cold dark of the Oort cloud, Watcher Primus Xylo processed the data with a growing sense of disbelief. The primitives had detected their Tier 2 probe. They had not attempted communication. They had not attempted a direct assault. They had used a gravity-based mass driver to intentionally strike their own satellite, creating a wide dispersion debris field to destroy the probe. It was illogical. It was inefficient. It was suicidal. It was a tactic born of sheer, unquantifiable madness. A lesser species would have tried to hide. A more advanced species would have engaged ship to ship. These human, they had punched themselves in the face to bloody the nose of their enemy. Xylo reviewed the data from the first probe, the one that had gone dark months ago. The final microsecond of its log showed a single object approaching a crude, chemically propelled spike of metal. They hadn't used a laser or a plasma bolt. They had thrown a rock. Now they were throwing moons. A new directive began to form in Xylo's crystalline mind. The initial assessment was wrong. These were not ripe primitives. This was not a resource to be harvested. This was a contagion. A species whose first response to an unknown contact was uncalculated, disproportionate violence. A species that treated the laws of physics not as rules, but as suggestions for creative mayhem. The planet would need to be cleansed, not for resources, not for conquest, but for the simple, pragmatic reason that a species like this could not be allowed to reach the stars. It was a matter of galactic hygiene. In the Siberian bunker, Kalen watched the telemetry from the moon fade from the main screen. The shrapnel cloud would orbit for decades, a permanent, glittering monument to their defiance. He looked at Thorn, who was staring at the screen, his face grim. "They'll be back," Kalen said. "And they won't be sending probes." Thorn nodded, his chrome hand resting on the command console. "I know. And we'll be waiting. We've shown them we can be loud. Now we have to show them that our bite is far, far worse than our bark." He turned to a communications officer. "Get me a line to the orbital stations. All of them. The Spire, Tranquility Base, even the pirate nests in the belt. Tell them the boogeyman is real. And tell them Earth is hiring." The age of hiding was over. The age of the scavenger had begun. Humanity, the scarred, half-dead animal of the solar system, had just bared its teeth. And the galaxy was about to discover how deep the wounds of a desperate survivor could truly run. The message from Earth was not a request. It was a summons. On every station, from the cislunar habitats to the frozen methane refineries of Titan. Thorn's declaration echoed through comms channels clogged with a century of static and mistrust. He didn't speak of patriotism or a united humanity. He spoke of extinction, a language every scavenger, pirate, and corporate drone understood. The moonshot, as the Belt Dwellers were calling it, had become a legend in a matter of weeks. An act of such magnificent, self-destructive insanity that it commanded a grudging respect. It was one thing to fight an enemy. It was another to shatter your own shield just to see them bleed. This was the foundation of Thorn's new alliance, a shared capacity for madness. He called for a summit, not on Earth or any coalition-controlled territory, but in the carcass of a pre-collapse colony ship. The Odyssey, adrift in the asteroid belt. It was a place of ghosts, considered neutral ground because no one sane wanted it. Kalen stood beside Thorn on the bridge of a coalition stealth frigate, a vessel that was less a warship and more a flying collection of scavenged heat sinks and jury-rigged sensor baffles. He wore the uniform of a coalition special advisor, a title that meant nothing and everything. It meant Thorn trusted his instincts. It meant Kalen was no longer just the man who threw the first rock. He was now responsible for showing others where to aim. The Odyssey loomed in the viewport, a colossal wreck tumbled by a slow, centuries-long spin. Its hull was pockmarked by micrometeorites, its name barely legible under a crust of cosmic dust. "They'll come," Thorn said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the deck plates. "They'll posture and bargain, but they'll come. Fear is a better motivator than loyalty." "They're not afraid of what's out there," Kalen corrected him, his eyes scanning the approaching fleet of mismatched ships, the bulky, utilitarian haulers of the Jovian Combine, the sleek, weaponized pleasure craft from the Venusian aerostats, and the ugly, brutal assault ships of the asteroid pirates. "They're afraid of you. They think this is a power grab, a second unification war with a convenient alien boogeyman." "Let them," Thorn replied, a glint in his eye. "Fear is fear, as long as it points them in the right direction. I don't care what they call it." The summit took place in the Odyssey's vast, zero-gravity biodome. The glass had long since shattered, leaving the skeletal metal frame open to the void. The attendees floated in the center, tethered to the frame, their envirosuits lit by the cold, distant light of the sun. It was a gathering of wolves, jackals, and vultures, forced into the same cage by the scent of a lion. The most formidable of them was Eva Rostova, warden of the chute, a hollowed-out asteroid that served as the belt's most infamous prison and black market. She was a child of the void, tall and gaunt, her face scarred by a radiation burn that had stolen her left eye, which was now replaced by a cold, whirring optical sensor. Her ship, the Debt Collector, bristled with more illegal weaponry than the rest of the pirate fleet combined. "Your little light show on the moon was impressive, Thorn." Rostova's voice crackled over the shared comms channel, devoid of any warmth. "But it accomplished nothing. You've kicked the nest. You haven't killed the swarm. Now you want our ships, our people, our resources, to fight a war you started with a rock hauler's temper tantrum." She gestured with her chin towards Kalen, who floated silently behind Thorn. "I started nothing," Thorn countered, his voice steady and calm, a rock in a river of hostility. "I simply answered the door. The Vex, as our linguistic programs have dubbed them, have been watching us for some time. They assessed us as a fractured, pre-stellar civilization, ripe for cleansing. Kalen's action only accelerated their timetable. Your isolationism is a death sentence. They won't distinguish between a coalition citizen and an asteroid miner when they begin to burn our worlds." "And what do you offer in return for our allegiance?" asked a portly man in a gaudy, gold-plated suit, the emissary from the Venusian Corporate Council. "Amnesty forgiveness for a century of so-called piracy and sedition." Thorn's cybernetic hand clenched. "I offer you a chance to die on your feet. I am opening the pre-collapse military archives. Project Chimera, the Helios-class plasma drives, the schematics for every weapon we built when we were trying to kill each other. Everything. We will arm every ship, train every soldier, and turn this solar system into a graveyard for anyone who comes knocking. We will fight as one, or we will die as many." Rostova's mechanical eye whirred as it focused on Thorn. Words are cheap. The Coalition has always wanted the Belt's resources. This smells like an excuse to put us all on a leash. The debate raged for hours, a stalemate of old grievances and deep-seated paranoia. While the leaders of humanity argued over who would hold the knife was already falling. The Vex sanitation fleet translated from hyperspace at the edge of the Kuiper Belt. There were only 3 of them, but they were unlike anything humanity had ever conceived. They weren't ships in the traditional sense. They were more like seeds. Sleek, obsidian thorns, a kilometer in length, that moved with an unnatural grace, untroubled by the laws of inertia. They did not target Earth or Mars. Their objective was a small, insignificant mining outpost on Triton, Neptune's largest moon. The outpost, known as Whisper's Reach, was a collection of pressurized domes housing a few hundred souls who mined frozen nitrogen for the outer planets. The Vex ships took up a synchronous orbit. They fired no weapons. Instead, a shimmering gray mist was released from the underside of each vessel. The mist descended slowly, catching the faint sunlight like a cloud of diamond dust. It was beautiful. Then it touched the surface of the moon. The comms officer at Whisper's Reach screamed for exactly 12 seconds. His last transmission to the Jovian Combine Patrol was not a description of an attack, but of a conversion. The mist, a swarm of self-replicating nanites, was not destroying the outpost. It was consuming it. Metal, rock, ice, and flesh were all being broken down and reassembled. The domes dissolved into flowing, metallic rivers. The ground itself began to shift, rising into crystalline spires that pulsed with the same clean, internal energy Kalen had seen in the probe. The outpost was being transformed into a Vex terraforming engine, a massive broadcast array powered by the very atoms of its victims. Within an hour, Whisper's Reach was gone, replaced by a glowing, alien citadel that began to emit a powerful, directional signal back into deep space. The recording of that final transmission was played in the biodome of the Odyssey. The arguing stopped. The posturing ceased. The 12 seconds of screaming, followed by the sight of a human settlement being unmade at a molecular level, cut through a century of politics. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the hiss of rebreathers. Rostova was the first to speak, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. "What was that phase matter conversion?" Kalen said, stepping forward. He had been running simulations with Thorne's science teams, trying to extrapolate from the limited data of the probes. "A nanite swarm. They don't bomb cities. They digest them. They're not here to conquer us. They're here to erase us and use the raw materials to call the main fleet." Thorne looked at the assembled leaders, his face a mask of cold fury. "The debate is over. You will give me your ships and your soldiers, or you will watch as your homes are turned into monuments for our extinction. There is no third option." This time, no one argued. A fleet was hastily assembled, a motley collection of every ship that could hold a weapon, from coalition frigates to retrofitted pirate corvettes. It was an ugly, desperate armada, held together by fear and flimsy alliances. Their target was the Vex sanitation fleet, still in orbit over Triton. A direct assault was suicide. The Vex ships were shielded, their hulls capable of shrugging off kinetic rounds and the crude plasma cannons the pirates favored. But Kalen had spent his life in the ruins, thinking not like a soldier, but like a rat. You don't fight the exterminator head on. You chew through the walls and bite him in the ankle when he's not looking. We can't kill them from the outside, Kalen explained, pointing at a holographic map in the Odyssey's makeshift command center. Rostova, Thorn, and the other faction heads listened intently. But they have one vulnerability. They're converting the moon. They're drawing massive amounts of energy and material from the surface to power that new citadel. They're connected to it. What are you proposing? Rostova asked, her optical eye glowing faintly. Triton is a geological nightmare, Kalen said, zooming in on the moon's surface. It's covered in cryovolcanoes that erupt with nitrogen, methane, and dust. The crust is unstable. We don't need to break their ships. We just need to break the moon they're standing on. The plan was as insane as the moonshot, and twice as desperate. The fleet's heaviest ships, the bulk ore haulers from the Jovian Combine, were stripped of their cargo and filled with every explosive the Alliance could spare. They were turned into massive, slow-moving bombs. The pirate ships, fast and nimble, would act as decoys, drawing the Vex's attention with harassing runs. The Coalition's small fleet would provide coordination and fire support. The objective wasn't to destroy the Vex ships, but to herd them, to force them into a low, stable orbit directly over the weakest point in Triton's crust. As the human fleet approached, the Vex responded with unnerving precision. 2 of the 3 Thorns moved to intercept, while one remained tethered to the citadel by a shimmering beam of energy. The Vex ships didn't fire weapons. They deployed smaller swarms of nanites, corruptors, that attached to the hulls of the human ships, eating through armor plating like acid. The pirates' swift attacks turned into panicked, evasive maneuvers. Several ships were lost, their crews sending out a final, garbled scream as their vessels were literally consumed from the outside in. The debt collector took a hit, and a section of its portside armor began to flow like mercury. Rostova, her face grim, rerouted power, jettisoning the entire section of the hull into the void before the corruption could spread. But the decoys worked. The Vex ships were drawn into the chase, their methodical programming identifying the small, fast ships as the primary threat. This gave the lumbering ore haulers the window they needed. Guided by Kalen from the Odyssey's command center, the 3 massive bombs made their final approach, not toward the ships, but towards Triton itself. They plunged into the moon's thin nitrogen atmosphere, becoming 3 brilliant, suicidal meteors. They impacted with the force of geologic events, striking a chain of dormant cryovolcanoes. The effect was catastrophic. The crust of Triton fractured. A chain reaction of eruptions tore across the moon's surface. Geysers of supercooled nitrogen and methane, hundreds of kilometers high, erupted into space. The moon rang like a bell, and the citadel, the Vex's half-formed masterpiece, shattered. The energy feedback surged up the tether, connecting it to the 3rd Vex ship. The obsidian Thorn convulsed, its shields flickering and dying as its own energy source turned against it. It went dark, crippled and drifting. The other 2 Vex ships ceased their attack instantly. Their logic dictated that the primary objective of the Citadel was lost. Their own survival was now paramount. Without hesitation, they turned and accelerated away, vanishing back into the void as quickly as they had appeared. The human fleet was battered, mauled, and bleeding. They had lost nearly a third of their ships, but they had won, floating in the silent dark, amidst the debris of their own fleet and the erupting fury of a shattered moon. Was their prize a crippled, powerless, but largely intact alien warship? Kalen watched the view screen, his knuckles white where he gripped the console. Rostova's voice came over the comm, strained but laced with a grim triumph. "Well, Thorn, it seems your scavenger just caught us a lion." On the bridge, Thorn allowed himself a rare, thin smile. "Good," he said, his eyes fixed on the drifting alien vessel. "Now we're going to learn how to tear it apart." The war for survival was over. The war for vengeance had just begun. The Vex ship, which the engineers had morbidly christened the Carrion, was towed with agonizing slowness from the orbit of shattered Triton to a secret facility hidden in the churning, acidic clouds of Venus. The location was Rostova's suggestion. The Venusian aerostats were controlled by the corporate council, masters of secrecy and industrial espionage, and their floating research platforms, suspended by massive balloons in the only habitable layer of the planet's atmosphere, were invisible to any known sensor technology. Here, shielded by miles of corrosive gas and crushing pressure, humanity began its first autopsy of an alien enemy. The project was codenamed Prometheus, and it became the crucible in which the fragile alliance Thorn had forged was either going to harden into steel or shatter into dust. Kalen was put in charge of the initial breach team, not because he was a soldier or an engineer, but because, as Thorn put it, "You think like a burglar, and right now we need to pick the galaxy's most complicated lock." He was paired with Dr. Eris Thorn, Marcus's estranged son. Where Marcus was a hammer, Eris was a scalpel. He was a xenolinguist and theoretical physicist, a man who had spent his life in sterile labs, chasing the ghosts of ideas. He viewed the Vex not as an enemy, but as the ultimate dataset, a puzzle of unimaginable complexity. The tension between the two men was immediate and palpable. Kalen saw a naive academic who was going to get them all killed. Eris saw a cynical brute who couldn't appreciate the beautiful, terrible science of their captive. Their first challenge was simply getting inside. The Carrion's hull was a seamless, non-Euclidean structure that seemed to shift and reform on a microscopic level, actively repairing any damage they tried to inflict. Drills blunted, lasers diffused, and explosives were absorbed with barely a ripple. For weeks, they were stumped, floating outside the silent, obsidian Thorn, taunted by the secrets it held. It was Eris who had the breakthrough. He wasn't looking at the ship's physical structure, but at its energy signature. Though crippled, the ship was not dead. A faint hum of residual power still flowed through its systems, a kind of biological homeostasis. "It's not a machine," Eris announced, his eyes wild with discovery as he pointed to a swirling energy schematic. "It's a life form, a biomechanical organism. We've been trying to break down a door when we should be looking for a keyhole. It doesn't have an airlock. It has a sphincter." The idea was as repulsive as it was brilliant. They stopped trying to cut their way in and started trying to communicate, using the energy frequencies extrapolated from the original probe. Eris's team began broadcasting simple mathematical concepts, prime numbers, the Fibonacci sequence at the hull. For days, there was no response. Then, on the 8th day, a section of the hull rippled. It didn't open, but it became porous, allowing a single, tiny drone to pass through into the ship's interior. The footage the drone sent back was a nightmare symphony of alien biology and technology. The corridors were not metal hallway, but pulsating, vascular tubes, The ship's systems were not consoles and wires, but glowing, organ-like nodes suspended in a nutrient gel. The air was a thick, ozone-rich soup that would be toxic to humans. And everywhere there were the nanites, flowing in glittering rivers along the walls, the ship's blood and bone. The drone's journey ended in what they presumed was the bridge, a cavernous chamber where a single, desiccated Vex pilot was fused into a central command throne. It was dead, its crystalline body shattered by the energy feedback from Triton, but its connection to the ship remained. It was from this dead pilot that the Prometheus team made its second, and most terrifying, discovery. The Vex didn't use conventional faster-than-light travel. They didn't bend space or create wormholes. They used something called a tangle drive. Eris struggled to explain it in layman's terms. Imagine every point in the universe is quantumly entangled with every other point, he said, his hands tracing complex patterns in the air. The Vex don't travel through space. They simply redefine their position within it. They convince the universe that they are no longer here, but there. It's not physics. It's a form of cosmic hacking. This revelation sent a chill through the Alliance's leadership. It meant the Vex could appear anywhere, at any time, without warning. There could be no choke points, no defensive lines. The entire solar system was the front line. While Eris and his science team worked feverishly to understand the tangled drive, Kalen and Rostova's engineers focused on a more pragmatic problem: Vex weaponry. They had captured thousands of the corruptor nanites from the hulls of their damaged ships. Under microscopic analysis, they learned how the nanites worked. They were programmable matter, capable of disassembling any substance and reassembling it into Vex structures. But they required a constant stream of commands from a central source, a Vex ship or citadel. If we can disrupt the command signal, a grizzled pirate engineer named Jax explained, his face smudged with grease, the nanites go dormant. They're just dust. This became the focus of Project Spitfire, the development of a wide-spectrum electromagnetic pulse weapon tuned specifically to the Vex command frequency. It was a race against time. They all knew the Vex would be back. The destruction of the Triton sanitation fleet was not a defeat. It was a data point. The Vex now knew humanity was not just illogical, but capable. They would not send another small team. They would send a fist. The fist arrived 6 months after the Battle of Triton, a single Vex ship, but one that dwarfed the Thorns. It was a harvester, 10 kilometers long, a brutalist wedge of black crystal and pulsing energy. It didn't stop in the outer system. It tangled directly into high orbit over Mars, home to the Jovian Combine's largest civilian population and the breadbasket of the outer planets. The Harvester ignored the small patrol fleet, dismissing it as irrelevant. Its objective was planetary conversion. A gray mist, 1,000 times larger than the one that had consumed Whisper's Reach, began to descend toward the sprawling dome cities of the Martian plains. The human fleet, now larger and better organized, raced to intercept. The flagship was a rebuilt coalition dreadnought, the Unforgiven, commanded by Marcus Thorne himself. On its bridge, he watched the Vex ship with a cold, predatory calm. "Launch the Spitfire wings," he ordered. "Rostova, your fleet will flank them. Draw their corruptors. We need to give the bombers a clean run." The battle that ensued was a brutal, chaotic melee. The debt collector, now patched and reinforced, led a swarm of smaller, faster ships in a series of daring, suicidal passes, their plasma cannons flaring against the Harvester's immense hull. The Vex ship responded with swarms of corruptors that moved like intelligent, malevolent hornets. The sky between Mars and its moons became a tangled web of plasma fire, missile trails, and glittering nanite clouds. But this time, humanity had an answer. A squadron of specially modified bombers, each carrying a single Spitfire pulse bomb, dove towards the Harvester. Their armor plating was already beginning to dissolve under nanite assault as they got into position. "Fire on my mark." The wing commander's voice crackled over the comms, strained with G-forces and the sheer terror of their mission. For Triton, the bombs were released. They didn't explode with fire and shrapnel, but with a silent, invisible wave of pure energy. For a single, breathtaking moment, the nanite clouds swarming around the human fleet froze. Their glittering, flowing forms went dull, inert, and they began to drift away like so much useless dust. The effect on the Harvester was even more profound. The mist descending on Mars dissipated, its connection to the mother ship severed. The Harvester's energy signature flickered wildly, and sections of its hull began to corrode, its own internal nanites going haywire without their guiding instructions. "All ships, concentrate fire on their primary energy conduit," Thorn roared. Seeing his opportunity, the human fleet, free from the terror of the corruptors, unleashed a furious barrage. Kinetic rounds, plasma bolts, and nuclear-tipped missiles slammed into the weakened section of the Vex ship. For the first time, they did real damage. The obsidian hull cracked. A wound of brilliant, white-hot energy opened on its side. The Harvester, a being of pure logic and overwhelming power, seemed to recoil in something akin to pain. It ceased its attack, and the silence that fell was more terrifying than the noise of battle. Then, it began to move, not to flee, but to fall. It was deliberately deorbiting, on a collision course with the largest Martian city, Olympus. "It's trying to deny us the wreckage," Rostova snarled over the comms. "It's going to turn itself into a planetary extinction event." "Not on my watch," Thorn replied, his voice dangerously quiet. He turned to his helmsman. "Bring us about. Set a collision course." "Sir." The helmsman stammered, his face pale. "You can't be serious." "The Unforgiven is a pre-collapse warship," Thorn said, his chrome hand gripping a railing as the ship began its final desperate turn. "Its spine is reinforced with a kilometer of solid adamantium. It was built to crack planets. Let's see if it can crack a god." He opened a channel to the entire fleet. "This is Director Thorn. It has been an honor. Get clear of the blast radius. Avenge us." The Unforgiven, the pride of the Coalition fleet, accelerated towards the falling Vex behemoth. The two ships met over the plains of Mars in a cataclysm of fire and force. The human dreadnought, a monument to a forgotten age of warfare, plunged into the wound of the Harvester like a spear into the heart of a leviathan. The resulting explosion was silent in the vacuum, but it was the brightest light humanity had ever created. It vaporized both ships instantly and scoured the Martian surface for 1,000 miles in every direction, turning the red sand to black glass. When the light faded, the sky over Mars was empty. The Harvester was gone. The Unforgiven was gone. Marcus Thorn was gone. Humanity had survived, but at a cost that felt like a defeat. Back on Venus, Kalen watched the recording of Thorn's final moments, a muscle twitching in his jaw. The war had a new martyr. Eris stood beside him, his face a mixture of horror and scientific awe. My father, he always believed in the grand gesture. He just saved millions of lives, Kalen said gruffly, though the loss hit him harder than he would admit. Did he? Eris countered, turning to the data streaming in from the battle. Or did he just confirm the Vex's hypothesis about us? They believe we are a chaotic, self-destructive species. My father just proved them right in the most spectacular way possible. He didn't just destroy a Vex ship, he destroyed a priceless source of data. We learned more from the Carrion in 6 months than we have in a century of our own research. Imagine what we could have learned from a harvester. Kalen turned to face him, his anger flaring. We don't have time to learn, Doctor. We have time to fight. Your father understood that. He bought us time, and I'm not going to waste it. The victory on Mars was a turning point. Humanity now had a proven weapon against the nanites and the will to use it. But they had also shown their hand. The Vex now knew they could be hurt. The next wave would not be a single harvester. It would be an armada. The Prometheus project took on a new, desperate urgency. Aris buried himself in the mysteries of the Tangle Drive, while Kalen and Rostova's teams began a new, audacious project reverse engineering the Vex ship itself. They didn't just want to understand it. They wanted to build their own. The plan was born of the same magnificent madness that had defined the war so far. They were going to steal the Vex's fire. They were going to build a ship, a human-Vex hybrid, and take the war to them. The age of defense was over. It was time for humanity to kick down the door and start shouting into the jungle themselves. The project to build a human-Vex hybrid ship was christened Nemesis, a name that felt less like an aspiration and more like a prophecy. The floating workshops of Venus became a hellscape of frantic, desperate innovation. Engineers worked in 3-day shifts, fueled by stimulants and the ambient terror of what was coming. They were no longer just scientists and soldiers. They were blacksmiths trying to forge a sword from a lightning bolt. The primary obstacle was the interface. The Carrion was not piloted, it was inhabited. The dead Vex operator was not a separate entity from its ship, but an integrated biological component. To control a Vex vessel, one needed to become part of it. This was a line many were unwilling to cross. The specter of the Vex's conversion technology hung over the project like a shroud. To interface with the ship was to risk becoming other, yet there was no shortage of volunteers. Thorn's sacrifice had ignited a firestorm of vengeful fanaticism across the solar system. People who had lost families on Triton and Mars were lining up for a chance to become the weapon that would strike back. The initial trials were catastrophic. The subjects, connected to a salvaged Vex control node via a neural link, suffered massive seizures, brain hemorrhages, or complete psychotic breaks. Their minds, evolved for linear thought and singular consciousness, were overwhelmed by the ship's multi-dimensional biological data stream. It was like trying to drink from a fire hose. Eris Thorn, now the reluctant head of the Prometheus project, argued for a more cautious approach. We're trying to force a human mind into a Vex framework. It's like trying to run a hyper-advanced operating system on a pocket calculator. We need to build a bridge, an interpreter. His solution was as controversial as the problem: a sentient AI, pre-collapse artificial intelligences, the so-called Titans. had been outlawed after the Unification Wars. Their cognitive abilities deemed too powerful and unpredictable. Most had been erased, but rumors persisted of dormant fragments hidden in the deep web, digital ghosts in the machine. Aris believed one of these fragments could be adapted to act as a buffer between a human pilot and the Vex ship, translating the alien data into a form the human brain could process without shattering. While Aris hunted for a ghost, Rostova and Kalen tackled the physical construction of the Nemesis. They weren't building a ship from scratch. They were performing a grotesque form of surgery, grafting human technology onto the living bones of the carrion. They ripped out its dormant weapon systems and replaced them with Spitfire pulse emitters. They retrofitted the vascular corridors with atmosphere processors and gravity plates. They carved out a human-sized cockpit from the central biochamber, a sterile steel cage implanted in the heart of an alien beast. The result was a monstrosity, a hybrid of sleek, organic curves and brutal, welded-on human machinery. The ship seemed to be in a constant state of low-grade rejection, the Vex parts of the hull sometimes developing a crystalline rash around the human modifications. Kalen found himself spending more and more time on the project, his role as an advisor blurring into that of a de facto commander. He walked the pulsating corridors of the half-finished ship, his hand resting on the rivet gun that was now holstered to his tactical vest, a relic from a simpler time. He felt a strange, proprietary connection to the vessel. He had found the first probe. He had helped plan the capture of the carrion, and now he was overseeing its monstrous rebirth. The ship was a physical manifestation of humanity's journey from frightened primitives to vengeful innovators. He felt its pull, the silent, psychic hum of its dormant systems calling to him. He volunteered to be the pilot. Rostova was against it immediately. "Don't be a fool, Kalen. We've lost a dozen pilots in the simulators. You're more valuable as a strategist. We need your mind, not your corpse." "What good is a strategist if no one can fly the only weapon that matters?" he countered. "I've been closer to their tech than anyone. I felt that first probe looking at me. I know them. Ava. Not their science or their language, but their intent. I know what it feels like to be their prey." That's a better qualification than any pilot's license. Before they could argue further, Eris burst into the workshop, his face pale, but his eyes burning with a triumphant, manic energy. "I found one," he breathed, holding up a data slate displaying a cascade of impossibly complex code. A dormant Titan AI, fragmented and buried in the archives of a defunct corporation. It called itself Charon. It was a logistics AI for the original Odyssey colony ship, designed to manage the lives of 1 million souls on a multi-generational journey. Its core programming is built around empathy and long-term survival. The plan was set. Sharon would be the bridge. Kalen would be the pilot. The Nemesis project moved into its final, terrifying phase. Kalen was placed in the cockpit, a cramped sphere of screens and control yokes that felt absurdly primitive inside the vast, organic cathedral of the ship. He was strapped into a chair, and a crown of silvery electrodes was lowered onto his head. "Karen is spooling up," Eris's voice said in his ear, tinny through the comm. "He will establish a baseline with your neural patterns. Then he will attempt the first handshake with the ship's core. It may be disorienting." That was the understatement of the century. The moment Karen connected to the Vex core, Kalen's world dissolved. He was no longer in a cockpit. He was everywhere. He was the ship. He felt the slow, rhythmic pulse of the nutrient gel through its veins. He saw in 1,000 different spectrums of light at once. He tasted the vacuum of space and felt the faint gravitational pull of Jupiter. His consciousness expanded, stretching to the breaking point, and a voice echoed in the storm. It wasn't Aris's voice. It was calm, ancient, and profoundly sad. The chaos receded, filtered and organized by the AI into something Kalen could comprehend. The incomprehensible flood of biological data was translated into familiar readouts on his screens. The ship's sensory inputs became a 360-degree holographic display around him. He could feel the ship's hull as if it were his own skin. He tentatively reached out with his mind, and a corridor on the far side of the ship lit up in response. He thought about the external viewing cameras, and his perspective instantly shifted. Looking down at the Venusian platform from a kilometer above, it was intoxicating and terrifying. He was a god in a machine made of flesh. Their shakedown cruise was a short, terrifying jump to the orbit of Mercury. Aris had managed to partially reverse engineer the Tangle drive. He couldn't initiate a jump to a new, unknown location, but he could follow the scars in space-time left by previous Vex jumps. It was like following a footprint. Kalen, with Karin as his guide, focused on the space-time coordinates of the Harvester's arrival point. Karin warned. Kalen engaged the drive. Space didn't distort or stretch. It simply broke. The Venusian workshop vanished, replaced by a nauseating, instantaneous lurch and the sight of Mercury's pockmarked face filling his viewport. The Nemesis had just crossed the solar system in the time it took to blink. They had done it. They had a Tangle-capable ship, a weapon of unimaginable potential. But their triumph was short-lived. Karen's voice cut through Kalen's elation, now tinged with something new. Fear. I am detecting multiple Vex Tangle signatures. They are inbound. Not one ship. Dozens. They are not coming for Mars or Earth. They are coming here. They are coming for us. The Vex had not been idle. The destruction of the Harvester had taught them a valuable lesson. Humanity was clever, and their greatest strength was their ability to reverse engineer and adapt. The Vex knew about the Carrion. They knew about the Prometheus project. And they were coming to reclaim their stolen property and sterilize the thieves. The Vex fleet that tangled into orbit around Venus was not a sanitation crew. It was a war fleet, 20 Thorns, supported by 3 Harvesters, a vision of geometric, obsidian death that blotted out the stars. Ava, get your people out of there, Kylan yelled into the comm, his hands gripping the controls. Get everyone off the platform, Eris. Are you seeing this? I see it, came the reply. Eris's voice tight with panic. The lead Harvester is broadcasting on a dedicated frequency. It's a demand, not a threat. They are demanding the return of their damaged offspring and the surrender of the sentient parasites who defiled it. Give 'em my regards. Rostova's voice growled back. A swarm of her pirate ships and the remaining coalition vessels rose from the Venusian clouds, forming a desperate, hopelessly outmatched defensive screen around the research platform. We're not giving them a damn thing. Kalen knew they stood no chance. The fleet was a speed bump. The Spitfire bombs were a finite resource, and they were facing an armada. But as he watched the Vex fleet arrange itself into a perfect, menacing formation, Karen spoke again in his mind, its voice now grim and resolute. An idea, born of Kalen's scavenger instincts and Thorn's magnificent madness, began to form in his mind. "Eris," he said into the comm, his voice steady. "Can you calculate a short-range tangle, a jump of less than 1,000 kilometers? Theoretically, the energy cost would be immense, and the spatial calculations. The margin for error is almost zero. You could rematerialize inside a solid object, or not at all." "Just do it," Kalen commanded. He looked at the holographic display of the Vex fleet. They were a wall of impending death, but every wall has a crack. "Ava, I need you to make some noise. Draw their fire. Give me the biggest, loudest fireworks show you've got. Aim for the lead harvester," Karen asked, its AI mind racing through probabilities. None of them good. Kalen grinned, a feral, desperate expression. He felt the power of the nemesis humming through his bones, a living weapon waiting to be unleashed. "The Vex think we're primitives who learned how to throw rocks," he said, his eyes fixed on the heart of the enemy fleet. "I'm going to show them we learn how to be the rock." He was going to jump the nemesis not away from the battle, but directly into the middle of it. The sky above Venus burned. Rostova's fleet, a defiant mix of scavenged warships and pirate gunships, threw themselves at the Vex armada with the fury of a cornered animal. It was a battle they couldn't win, but winning wasn't the objective. The objective was noise. Explosions blossomed in the void as ships were consumed by corruptor swarms or simply erased by the clean. Terrifying efficiency of Vex particle lances. The debt collector flew like a demon, its plasma cannon spitting defiance, drawing the attention of the lead harvester. It was the distraction Kalen needed. Inside the nemesis, the universe contracted to the cockpit. Kalen was drenched in sweat, his mind and body screaming in protest at the strain of the neural interface. Karen's voice was a steady anchor in the storm of sensory data. "Every trip is..." Kalen grunted, his eyes fixed on the target, the dead center of the Vex formation, a space just behind the lead harvester, a blind spot their logic-driven tactics had failed to account for. He engaged the drive. The lurch was a physical blow, a sensation of being turned inside out and reassembled an instant later. The stars vanished and reappeared, horribly rearranged. They had jumped inside the enemy's shield, into the very heart of the beast. For a moment, there was absolute chaos. The Vex ships, locked in their rigid formation, were completely unprepared for an enemy to materialize in their midst. Their automated targeting systems went haywire, unable to distinguish friend from foe at such proximity. "Now!" Kalen roared. He didn't fire missiles or cannons. He unleashed the ship's true weapon. With a thought, he triggered every Spitfire pulse emitter grafted onto the Nemesis's hull, not as a focused bomb, but as a simultaneous, omnidirectional blast. A silent, invisible wave of pure energy erupted outwards, a bubble of electronic disruption that slammed into the surrounding Vex ships at point-blank range. The effect was devastating. The command signals for their nanite swarms were instantly severed. Corruptors attacking Rostova's fleet went inert. More importantly, the internal systems of the Vex ships themselves, reliant on their own nanite infrastructure, were thrown into chaos. Shields flickered and died. Energy conduits overloaded. Obsidian hulls, now deprived of their self-repairing nanites, began to crack and splinter under their own internal pressures. The perfect, geometric formation of the Vex fleet broke. Ships began to drift aimlessly. Some fired wildly, striking their own brethren. The nemesis, Its tangle drive, now a molten ruin, floated in the center of the chaos it had created. A virus that had just crashed an entire network. But the victory was momentary. The lead harvester, its systems already recovering, turned its immense bulk towards them. Its broadcast was no longer a demand. It was a screech of pure, undiluted rage that Karen translated as a single, repeating concept Karen warned, its calm voice strained. "Not yet. We're not." Kalen snarled. The fight wasn't over. He had one last rock to throw. "Eris, are you there? Can you hear me?" "I hear you." Eris's voice came back, choked with emotion. He had been watching from the Venusian platform, a witness to Kalen's impossible gamble. "My God, Kalen, you broke them." "Not yet," Kalen repeated. "The harvester is adapting. I need you to do something for me. The carry-on, the original Vex core, is still on board. Isn't it slave to your systems?" "Yes, but it's dormant." "Shielded." "Wake it up," Kalen interrupted, his voice deadly serious. "Give it full access to the ship's remaining power, and patch it through to the harvester's frequency." A horrified silence fell over the comm channel. "Kalen, no." Rostova's voice cut in. "You don't know what that will do. You'll be trapped in there with it." "It's been trapped in here with us." Kalen shot back. "It's been listening, watching." "Karen," he said, speaking now to the AI in his mind. "When the core comes online, I need you to show it everything. Show it Thorn's sacrifice. Show it the screams from Triton. Show it 100 years of humanity fighting in the dirt, refusing to die. Show it what it means to be a survivor." Karen replied, a note of something akin to awe in its synthetic voice. Eris, understanding Kalen's desperate, insane logic, complied. In the heart of the Nemesis, the dormant Vex biocore flared to life. Kalen screamed as a new consciousness slammed into his own. A mind of cold, alien logic, ancient and vast. But it was no longer a one-way street. Karen, acting as a relentless projector, flooded the Vex mind with the raw, chaotic, brutal reality of the human experience. It was a psychic assault of pure emotion rage, grief, desperation, love, and above all, an indomitable, irrational will to live. On the bridge of the lead harvester, the commanding Vex intelligence recoiled from the psychic blast. It had expected data, tactics, surrender. It received a soul, a screaming, bleeding, defiant soul. It felt the ghost of Marcus Thorn dying to save a world. It felt the fear of the miners on Triton as their bodies were unmade. And for the first time in its millions of years of existence, the Vex entity felt something other than logic. It felt confusion, doubt. The harvester's primary weapon, now fully charged, wavered. This was the moment Kalen had been waiting for. With the last dregs of his strength, he sent a final command to the Nemesis, not to its weapons, but to its life support. He overloaded the fusion reactor that powered the human grafted sections of the ship. The Nemesis began to die, its human half going into a violent, explosive meltdown. Alarms blared through the cockpit, and Karen's voice spoke a final, calm message. The Nemesis detonated. The explosion was not large by the standards of the battle, but its effect was absolute. It ripped through the heart of the crippled Vex fleet, finishing what the Spitfire pulse had started. The Harvester, its command intelligence still reeling from its psychic assault and now caught in the blast, was mortally wounded, its obsidian hull fractured, and with a final, silent shudder, It went dark. The remaining Vex ships, their command structure shattered, their logic broken, did the only thing they could. They fled, tangling out of the system in a panicked, disorganized retreat. The battle for Venus was over. The sky was silent, filled with the drifting wreckage of 2 fleets and the ghosts of their dead. Kalen was gone. The Nemesis was gone. But humanity had survived. In the weeks that followed, the fractured pieces of the Vex fleet were hunted down and destroyed by Rostova's ships. The solar system was, for the first time, truly secure. But the victory was somber. The cost had been immense. Marcus Thorne, Kalen, Karen, they had become legends, martyrs in a war no one had asked for. Eris Thorne, now the de facto leader of the unified human forces, stood on the observation deck of the Venusian platform, looking out at the stars. Beside him, Rostova watched, her mechanical eye whirring softly. "He did it," she said, her voice quiet. "The scavenger and the madman, they actually won." "Won," Eris mused, shaking his head. "No, we survived. There's a difference. We showed the galaxy that we're not just primitives. We're a contagion with a capacity for spectacular violence. We haven't made friends. We've created a reputation." He held up a data slate. On it were schematics, not for a weapon, but for a ship. It was based on the Nemesis, but sleeker, more integrated. And at its heart, a space for a new kind of AI, built on the fragments of Karen's code, and a new kind of tangle drive, reverse-engineered from his father's final, desperate act. The Vex were an exterminator, a force of nature. But the galaxy is full of other voices. Some will see us as a threat. Others might see us as an asset. Humanity's age of isolation was over. They had kicked the nest, fought the swarm, and somehow, through sheer, bloody-minded determination, they were still standing. They had been tested by fire, and had emerged not purified, but hardened, scarred, and infinitely more dangerous. The story of their victory, the tale of the scavenger who threw a rock and the director who threw a moon, would spread through the cosmos. They were no longer the quiet primitives, hiding in the ruins of their own making. They were the survivors, and they were about to step out into the jungle, not as prey, but as the new predators on the block. Their teeth sharpened on the bones of an enemy that had dared to call them weak. The universe was about to learn a very old lesson: never corner a creature that has nothing left to lose.